Hey everyone, I'm Chris Norman, and this is the Powers video, Volume 1. There's a lot of stuff here, so I'm going to make a second video to discuss the math. First off, I need to clarify some definitions. Throughout the videos, I've talked about advantages and powers and sometimes traits, but I want to be more specific. At the highest level, your character may have a trait, which is a mental, physical, or social feature, which is the same definition as an advantage. And even GURPS intermingles the two. Sometimes you'll see advantage, and sometimes you'll see traits, especially in stat blocks. But you can also have a disadvantage, which is computed the exact same way as an advantage, just for the negative points. So you can think of traits as being the same as advantages and disadvantages. Of course, a 1-point advantage is called a perk, and a 1-point disadvantage is called a quirk. So traits are advantages, disadvantages, perks, and quirks. Okay, I can see why they might use traits in a stat block. But in general, people will also just say advantage to mean either an advantage or a disadvantage, since they're mathematically the same. So now we're back to traits are equal to advantages in the larger general sense of the word. And going forward, I'm going to say advantage when I mean any trait, positive or negative. So, what's a power? Officially, a power is an exotic or supernatural gift that you can direct in different ways to produce a number of related effects. Okay, not so helpful. If we look at the components of a power is one or more advantages with a source, a focus, and a talent. What is the source of a power? Did the power come from your deity, or is it magical? Was your character exposed to radiation, or does the power come from within? In game terms, the source really just represents a possible limitation on the advantage, called the power modifier. If the power comes from magic, then an anti-magic area would dampen it, and the power modifier would be magical minus 10%. If the power comes from your deity, then displeasing your deity might get your powers revoked, and the power modifier would be divine, minus 10%. But the source is optional. They even say that a power could be wild and not have any source. Also, not every source needs to have a limitation or power modifier. The irradiated spider venom is obviously the source of Peter Parker's power, but that didn't seem to be a limitation for Spider-Man. The Powers book also talks about the origin of a power, which is slightly different than the source. In Spider-Man's case, the origin is the spider bite, and the source is the irradiated spider venom. But in game terms, there's nothing you need to do. The origin of a power is just for the story. There are no game rules covering origins. And the source of a power only matters if there's a limitation associated with it. If there's no limitation, there's no power modifier. The focus of a power is just for the story. The focus is just the concept the power revolves around. If you're creating various fire-based powers for your character, and then try to create a water power, you'll need to clear it with your GM and explain how a creature of fire is somehow generating water from their fingertips. I'm not saying it can't be done, but there are no game rules covering this. This is solely up to your ability to justify the power to your GM. Offering pizza sometimes helps, but your mileage may vary. The final item is a power talent. I've mentioned talents before in the magic video. The majory advantage works like a talent once you get over that odd level 0, and it adds +1 to any skill check that you're trying to do when casting a spell. But that's what a talent is, in general. It's a natural aptitude for a set of closely related skills. An advantage that gives you pluses to skill checks for those skills. I think one of the better-known talents is Outdoorsman, which gives you +1 to the skill level of a variety of outdoorsy skills. So why buy the talent? Well, it comes down to cost. If you look at the Outdoorsman talent, it has skills that rely on IQ and perception. You could just increase the IQ by 1 for 20 points, but that gets expensive. So instead, you can purchase the talent. You can create talents for whatever set of skills you want. The basic set lists a bunch of examples, like Animal Friend, Green Thumb, and of course, Outdoorsman. The idea being that the set of skills should be closely related, but that's up to the GM to decide what is or is not closely related. So the Powers book says that a power should have a power talent, which would apply to any skill checks when using that power. They give an example of a psi talent, which would add to any skill checks when using your psionic abilities. But there's no requirement to have a talent. If you have a power that doesn't really have any skill checks associated with it, then having a talent for it seems superfluous, which by extension means that it's really optional. If you want to have a power talent, you can. It would work exactly like Magery does for magic. Minus that stupid level 0 thing. Honestly, I wish they could have just come up with a magical awareness advantage for 5 points, and then treated Magery exactly like a talent, but that's just a pet peeve of mine. So there you are. A power is an advantage, or 2, possibly with a power modifier, a limitation based on its source, and a bunch of flavor text describing where it came from and how it presents itself, and possibly a power talent. If you don't want to define a source or describe a focus, you don't have to. But I think your power would be more interesting if it had a story behind it. But that's up to you. Side rant. This seems to be a point of contention when I post on the /RPG forum in Reddit. People argue that GURPS doesn't support the requested theme. Well, that's because there's nothing in GURPS that describes the theme. It's up to the GM and the players to describe how something looks and acts. GURPS just describes the effects in game terms. So it's up to you to fill in the descriptions, and I highly recommend that you do so. It makes your game more colorful and memorable. But if you expect the game system to describe it for you, then maybe GURPS isn't what you're looking for. GURPS is a framework on which you can hang your story. It doesn't have any story of its own. Okay, side rant over. So getting back to the definitions. Traits are advantages and disadvantages. And a power is an advantage with some extra flavor text. Advantages can have limitations, like a power modifier. So at a high level, traits equal advantages equals powers. But looking through the list of traits, the advantage wealth defines your starting money and gives you some social status concerning shopping, selling items, getting paid, etc. Would you create a power that changes your starting money? Probably not. But it's possible. This kind of social advantage might not seem like a power in the traditional superhero sense, but if you or your players can describe how it would work, there's nothing in the rules that prevents it. A social advantage is mathematically the same as a mental or physical one. So from now on, I may use the term advantage or power interchangeably, since they're basically the same concept, like two sides of the same coin. Okay, now that that's done, why are we here? As I described in the character video, characters are made up of attributes, advantages, and skills. And you start with a character concept. Well, I have a character concept in mind. Sophia Lilly's Druid in the new Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves movie. I've only seen the trailer, but I like what I see.
What is that again? It's an owlbear.
Let's go!
But when I look in the books to find an owlbear form, it doesn't have one. If you want the ability for your character to change into an owlbear, you need to buy the shape-shifting advantage with alternate form, and then build out the owlbear form. But let's stick a pin in this for the moment. You may know that I always said that character points are just for purchasing a level of fun. When you look into the basic set and start on character creation, it seems like a standard menu of things to buy. Spend 10 points to buy 1 point of strength, or 20 points to buy 1 point of IQ. Also, you pay so many points to buy levels and skills. Again, it seems like a standard purchasing system. Spend some points, get something in return. But when it comes to building a power, it gets a little more fuzzy. As you look through the advantages, you might not find exactly what you're looking for. Actually, you probably won't find exactly what you're looking for, but you might find something close. Maybe you just need to add an enhancement or a few limitations to make it work exactly like you want it to. Say, for example, I want my flying superhero's takeoff to include a small explosion that might topple things over when he leaps into the air, including weak opponents. Obviously, I'd start with the flying advantage. And then the link enhancement to add a crushing innate attack with no range and no damage, knockback only, and then maybe even double knockback, and make it an area effect of 2 yards, and voila! Okay, some of you are asking, how the heck did I do that? And how does this help me? I don't know the advantages, enhancements, and limitations like that. And I'll get to that. But I want to point out one little thing first. Does the hero get affected by the knockback blast? You would assume no, right? It makes sense thematically that the knockback occurs because of the takeoff. So is there a way to delay the innate attack by a millisecond so the hero can get away? As a programmer, I was looking how to actually build the power correctly, but I couldn't. I had this programmer mindset. I needed to know how to link the parts together based on the GURPS rules, but it didn't have a rule for this. Sometime later, I remember looking through the Steve Jackson forums on how to make a flashlight or torch power. There was a post with pages and pages of physics equations trying to determine how to craft the create advantage, which is defined in the power supplement, so that it would create light. It was pretty impressive, all those various calculations. And then Sean Punch, the line editor of GURPS, made a single post and said that a flashlight or lantern is a 1-point perk. No math involved. And it wasn't because Dr. Crom is Lord King of all things GURPS. It was because anyone can create a power. It says so on page 117 of the basic set. And that's when it hit me. When trying to build a power, you aren't actually purchasing the power from the GURPS store. Instead, you're trying to map their power creation cost guidelines onto your concept. You're just trying to use the GURPS rules to figure out a cost. You aren't actually buying the power. If that were true, you could only have the powers listed in the books, right? If the book didn't list the flying advantage, then you couldn't buy it. But on page 117 of the basic set, they describe how you can create your own advantages and how to determine the cost. And that's what Sean did with the 1-point flashlight perk. So in truth, there's nothing you cannot do in GURPS, if the GM wants it. Or looking at this the other way, you can purchase any power you want since you can create any advantage you want. So you aren't really building the power, you're just determining the cost. And as I've said many times, the sole purpose for the character points is to ensure fairness. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to drag you into some long philosophical debate, but it stands to reason that if you can purchase any power that you can dream up, the reason for the purchasing points is just to ensure fairness. So if you can agree with me on that, then building a power becomes, how do I use the pricing guidelines to get as close as I can to my power concept? Because obviously I can create any power that I want. And if you look at it that way, then creating a power becomes a lot less stressful. Because all you're trying to do is ensure fairness. And as I've mentioned before, the GURPS power level doesn't ramp up like other systems. So the difference between a 150-point character and a 154-point character probably wouldn't even be noticed. So how does this help you? Well, when you create a power, start with a concept. And it could be anything you want. And then try to map your concept to the purchasing rules. But don't stress over it. So long as you get close, your characters will probably be fair. So I could have built the superhero flight power like this. And just hand-waved the knockback-only area effect and other modifiers. And since it probably isn't the primary attack, it was just a cool add-on that I wanted for the takeoff, its overall effect on the game will probably be minimal, and a few points here and there won't really matter. And the difference between the two is 4 character points out of 50. Now, do I suggest you do this for every power? No. My goal has always been to help new GMs and players get into GURPS as quickly and as easily as possible. And hopefully, if they like it, they'll endeavor to learn more. So I'm trying to teach new GMs that it isn't bad when trying to estimate the cost of a power if you can't quite figure out how to map it into the rules as written. Or conversely, I expressly give you permission to estimate the cost of a power and move on.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
If you want the power to create an owlbear or a specialized superhero flight takeoff, then you'll have to take the responsibility of estimating their cost. If you can figure out how to do it using the rules as written, then great. If not, it's your responsibility to try to keep the costs fair. If you want to say that one character can have flying for 25 points, and that another character can have a slightly better version of flying for 30 points, you're welcome to. I'll just point out that GURPS has 30 plus years of gameplay and has been extensively researched, so it's pretty consistent, even if you do have to jump through hoops to make the mapping work. So how much time do you invest trying to match up the GURPS pricing rules to your incredibly creative and personalized power? Well, that's up to you. You can always use online references to try to figure out how your concept of a power would map to a GURPS advantage. Things like Enraged Eggplant's list of spells. Remember, these are Magic as Powers spells, so each spell is just a power. Or Island of War's list of spells. Or the GURPS Unofficial Handbook of the Marvel Universe, created by Phantasm over a 10-year period. All of these show examples of how to map a power concept into GURPS purchasing rules. So, do I have a magic way of creating a power? Sadly, I do not. But I do have this overarching design principle. I make the power as personalized as I want it, and then I try to map the GURPS costs to it. I use Google to see if others have already done it and how they did it, or I log on to the GURPS Discord if I need the answer in 10 minutes, or the Steve Jackson Games forums if I can wait 24 hours. But to paraphrase Uncle Ben, if I want a really cool power, then I may have to work for it. And it's okay if you're off by a few points. It's not illegal to purchase a power differently than somebody else would do it. You just have to be responsible for the game balance. And I would argue that a few points here and there aren't really going to upset the balance of the game. But the closer you can get to the GURPS rules as written, the more consistent you'll be with the overall character costs. One other issue that can occur when creating a power and determining its cost is it may not cost what you expect. Magic Missile is a great example. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, circa 1982, Magic Missile was this first-level spell that always hit and did 1d4 plus 1 damage. Well, to price that in GURPS, first you need to add the plus 100% cosmic enhancement so that you don't need to roll to hit. Then another plus 300% cosmic enhancement where the target doesn't get an active defense. GURPS really doesn't like it when you bypass the target's ability to have a defense. And another plus 300% enhancement to make it an irresistible attack, which bypasses the target's armor. As such, a simple 1 dice of crushing damage, normally 5 character points, would cost at least 40 points. Obviously not a first-level spell, especially if you only have 150 points total to create your character. And you'll find this a lot in other areas. Magic in other systems was usually created by fiat. The designers said that it did this, and it was this level, and that was about it. So don't be shocked if the cost isn't what you were expecting. At least the costs are consistent within GURPS. So getting back to the owlbear form, if you want to create this power, you have to do some work. You'll have to define the owlbear template. What attributes and advantages do you get from being an owlbear? And then pay the cost defined by the shape-shifting alternate form advantage. Yeah, it's a pain. It would have been much nicer if it had already been built for you. But once you have created your first racial template, you might find it easier to create another one. A template's just a collection of attributes and advantages that represent that race or species. Back in the character video, I showed this example, the dwarf racial template. So once you've defined what it means to be an owlbear, the cost of the power is easy to calculate. And then you can add more racial templates as the druid gets more and more powerful. but you pay for this flexibility because you have to design the alternate templates yourself. Or if you're lucky, you can find something online. One last piece of advice I can give you is to become familiar with the list of enhancements and limitations, which starts on page 101 of the basic set. You can create a bunch of personalized powers using simple advantages and a few enhancements or limitations. I described some examples in the magic video, some of Gren's funky spells, but here are a few more that may give you some ideas. The Green Goblin's flying wing could be a flight advantage, with the gadget limitations can be stolen and breakable. Or you could create a druidic power that allows them to take over a tree to use their limbs as arms. You could attack nearby targets, but also use the limbs to lift you up to the top of the nearby city wall. I'd create this with the telekinesis advantage, with an accessibility limitation that it only works on large trees. I've mentioned accessibility limitations before. They're the wildcard limitation. Page 110 of the basic set has guidelines on how to price it, but it's basically up to you. But this allows you to create any kind of limitation that you want. Many of Gren's spells use the accessibility limitation environmental occasional, must be standing on Mother Earth for a minus 20%, or accessibility must be outdoors for a minus 10%. So all of his spells have this powered by nature feel to them. I've created a blade barrier spell for one of the magical universities in my world. It's a +4 damage resistance, but only against cutting damage. A limited defense, check basic set, page 46. Kind of like the shields in the Dune novels. Or an old-school druidic shillelagh spell, which adds 1d crushing damage, but only to wooden weapons. Again, an accessibility limitation that I learned from looking through Enraged Eggplant spells. Or an old-school magical blur spell, which just adds the obscure advantage to the caster, so opponents are at a -4 to hit. But it has an accessibility limitation of no area effect, because obscure normally affects an area, the one hex in which the caster stands, and I didn't want that. I found this limitation on the Steve Jackson forums, reading a post by the author P.K. Levine, an assistant GURPS line editor. This is the same P.K. that I mentioned in the GCS video, where I use his house rule that the limitation cost fatigue should be -10% and not -5%. But notice, the no area effect limitation changes how the power works, not when or if. And this is allowed, because we can create any advantage we want. Remember, basic set, page 117? This is just a way to price it out, to use the obscure advantage, and to find a new limitation to reduce the effects. I probably wouldn't have been able to figure this one out on my own. Fortunately, my Google foo was good enough to find examples on the Steve Jackson forums. Or a Dragon Breath, which is a simple innate attack burn with the cone enhancement, and I could go on and on. If you plan to build a lot of powers, I recommend getting the Power-Ups 4 enhancements and Power-Ups 8 limitation supplements. They have collected all of the published enhancements and limitations into single documents and added a few more. They're a must-have when you're building powers. This is a huge world that can open up for you. You'll just have to invest the time to create your dream. Or don't. And stick with simpler or more easily understood powers and leave the complicated powers for later, when you have time to do that kind of investigation. That's sort of where I'm at the moment. I understand GURPS well enough that I can invest some time into creating powers that I want, specifically to use as spells. Remember that magic as powers thing. And I'm having fun doing so. As I mentioned in my very first video, creating characters is its own little mini-game, and a lot of that is designing your own powers. P.S. The GURPS system of advantages, enhancements, and limitations is amazingly flexible. You can define some really out-there powers. I think the winner for the most extreme power is The Munchkin's universe-shaking, non-directional, cosmic, hyperluminal, kineto-electromagnetic interference neurodisruptor. It's a cosmic attack, literally. Pulses of cosmic energy that radiate from the attacker burn out the neural system of living beings in the affected area, which is 74 gigaparsecs across, far larger than our universe. Note that an area effect attack with emanation involves no to-hit roll and simply affects anyone in the area. And there's no effective cover since this is a cosmic, irresistible attack which ignores DR. Basically, the user can attack every living thing in our entire universe with 1 point of damage, 300 times per second. And this is a point croc, which is a term I just recently learned, which is an abuse of the system either by breaking the rules or putting things together that go against the intention of the rules. But why do I point this out? To show you that the GURPS rules are extremely flexible. Even though I wouldn't approve a power like this, it's the exception that proves the rule. You can design just about any power in GURPS and figure out its cost if you really want to. If the system can be stretched to this limit, then it can easily handle simpler powers, and it all remains internally consistent. Which is another reason why GURPS is the last RPG system that I will ever learn. It can do anything. I hope you don't feel like I clickbaited you into watching this video. The realization that you're just trying to determine a cost and not build a power took me years to come by, and it was a huge revelation to me. Once I figured this out, the last stumbling block was removed. Trying to figure out how to build a power just wasn't making any sense, or I could do it sometimes when it was simple, but if I tried to make something more complicated, invariably, I wouldn't be able to figure out how to link it all together. It always seemed like pieces were missing, and it was very frustrating. Now that I know that I'm just trying to determine a cost and not actually build the power, well, that was a turning point for me. I finally had a good grasp of GURPS, or enough GURPS for me, and that's all I needed. Like everyone else, I'll learn more as time goes on. If you like these videos, please subscribe. My face should pop up over there someplace. And as always, thank you for watching.